a good follow-on, 16A, Sage-Grouse update. Director Ken Mayer, in accordance with the Commission's request, Director Mayer will provide an update on the status of Sage-Grouse, which is pending listing under the Endangered Species Act.
Okay. While Patrick's putting this up there, audience, and passed a copy of it out to you. Paul does not make that look better, that's for sure.
Look, it's a blackout screen. It takes a while.
I've been asked so many different times about how all this stuff fits together. On a cocktail napkin, I sketched out the flow diagram of how I thought this stuff really does chart out. And what I thought I'd do is go through this flow diagram so that maybe you understand what it is we're doing nationally and within California and Nevada on the bi-state. And everybody can see that okay? At the top here, the Sage-Grouse Task Force was established by the Secretary of Interior, and they had their first meeting on March 5th. It was a conference call, and they're going to have one on the 12th of April. And that's actually, I'm going to change the title of that. It's going to be the State and Federal Sage-Grouse Task Force. So they're basically going to take a 30,000-foot look at what's going on with sage-grouse nationally, identify funding sources, agencies, the things that need to be done at a higher level, so that you can step back and look at the full field. Because what's been happening is that we've been scurrying around in the western United States trying to figure out how to address and be part of the solution for the listing. I want to point out this one box here, this Fish and Wildlife Service State Conservation Objective Team. This has never been done before in the history of the Endangered Species Act. The Secretary, as well as the Director of the Fish and Wildlife Service, has agreed to allow state biologists to work with the Fish and Wildlife Service biologists and actually develop the listing bar, the criteria, the process, the intellectual and science process they're going to go through to determine whether the bird is warranted to be listed or not. That is huge, because the way it's always worked is that the service would get a petition from whatever, Western Watersheds or whatever group that wanted a species listed. They would have a data call, and all of the state and other federal agency people would gather up the data. We would hand it to the service. They would, and I always kid them that they go in a room, close the door, turn the lights down, get the incense burning, and basically out the other end come up with a decision on whether the species should be listed or not. And then, of course, they would lay all the scientific things out, but none of us would really have an opportunity to ask questions or question the process. So this is huge, frankly, and I'm hoping that it works. Sean Espinosa has been nominated by the governor. The governors of the 11 western states have appointed their scientists to serve on this, and I can tell you by looking at the list, I would say 3/4 of them are the Sean Espinosa types, and the other are policy level folks, which I was concerned that the science guys could come up with something that wasn't implementable on the ground, and I had been concerned about that. But I think there's going to be enough checks and balances in this group. Now, the upsides of this is that everybody's going to have an opportunity to think about it and provide some guidance when they take the process that's developed by this multidisciplinary and agency team, and then they take all the data and they put it through the process and they come out, it's warranted. You can imagine everybody's going to take full responsibility, or on the opposite would be true as well. And I think in talking with the director of the service, he's really hopeful that this is the way we'd be able to do business in the future on other endangered species. So this is really, all eyes are on that. This National Sage-Grouse Executive Oversight Committee, and I want to point out one of the criticisms that Commissioner Rain has made about me personally and the department about not being involved in pushing to get this bird listed. I'm the chairman of this one. I'm also an advisor to this one. Sean Espinosa is a key technical person in this one. Sean Espinosa is also a key technical person here. I'm one of the directors, the co-chair of the Bi-State Sage-Grouse Task Force, Sean Espinosa is the chairman of the Bi-State Technical Team. He also works with the local working groups as well as our local biologists. And the Sage-Grouse Task Force, we're going to be in an advisory role and not an active voting member of that. And I'm also the chairman of the WAFA Western Bird Conservation Committee, and Sean is I think he's the vice chairman of the technical group. So we have jumped in with all in. And about 30% of my time, which is on top of being director, is put into sage-grouse, because it's not good for sportsmen, it's not good for industry, it's not good for the bird itself to be listed, quite frankly. Because I'm telling you, when they list the bird, we're walking away from it. How can I look, and I told this to the service the other day, how can I look the sportsman in the face and say, give me $2.3 million, which we've invested as sportsman's dollars into sage-grouse, when you control it? You need to come up with the money. And that is a message that they're hearing from every state director across 11 western states, and it makes them nervous. Because I don't think anything good is going to come from listing the bird, especially when there's 500,000 of them, probably west-wide. And I think that we can really address these threats that they've identified, which I believe are truly threats. I think that there's never been an effort like this before in this nation I can think of, where everybody's pulling together and investing the kind of money that's being invested. Okay, so the EOC, basically, national one, was born out of the WAFA Western Bird Committee and the Technical Sage-Grouse Committee. It was obvious to us that we were putting out all these publications. We were responding to what the Fish and Wildlife Service was asking us for, but there wasn't buy-in from the heads of the various agencies. So this National Sage-Grouse Executive Oversight Committee is made up of every director in the western United States, all 11 directors. They're either there personally, I would say about, out of the 11, 7 or 8 are there normally, or they're represented, the others would be sending a deputy director, and then all the directors of the federal land management agencies that have anything to do with sage-grouse management, habitat management, are also the members of this EOC. The important part about this is that as the risk team, which is our advisory group, basically it's the WAFA sage-grouse people on steroids, because we've got all the federal scientists here. So these two groups are providing input to the national EOC, and we're the ones that are identifying the resources and committing those resources to do work on the ground. So the Fish and Wildlife Service, when they came out with the listing and they decided that the threats were, one of the top 3 was a lack of a regulatory mechanism to protect the bird in perpetuity, is the BLM has joined forces with the Forest Service now to basically do an EIS, would be across the western United States, that would update all of their RMPs all at once. Now there's about 24 or 5 RMP, resource management plans, that are currently in the process of being updated. Now it takes 2 to 3 years, I find, to get these things updated. So they didn't want to mess that up. So that's continuing on. But all the other ones, there's 98 plans that are being updated. I think there's 19 forest and 20 land management plans that will all be updated as a result of this EIS process. They're currently in the draft stage. They're asking for input. The 23rd of March was the closing date of the scoping session, and that they will move forward. The goal on this is that they would have the EIS done and reviewed by the public, and they would make a record of decision in 2014. That would, once the record decision goes into place, that would change all the RMPs, and that would be the data source that would be given to the Fish and Wildlife Service as part of the data call for them to make their preliminary finding. Now, when they make their preliminary finding, they have 12 months then to take input. But you can imagine, if they decide warranted or not, whatever they decide, it will really take a huge thing to change their mind in that year. You can imagine. If they say there's no regulatory frameworks or they're not adequate, you can't change those RMPs in a year. There's too much time to turn those things around. I'm also a member of this BLM national policy team, so everything that they're doing here is coming from the national policy team and being reviewed by it. And so every other week, I have an hour to 2 hour conference call that I sit in. I represent all the Western directors on that call. And I can tell you that it's sometimes I think they're talking Martian because of the planning terms that are going on. But the relationship that I have with the state director of BLM is so good that she'll hit mute and kick me under the table and say, "Did you catch that?" And then she'll have to interpret some of the language they were using so that I can ask the pertinent question. So we're really working together. She does not want to see this bird listed either. And what I'm finding is that the current paradigm has been that all these division chiefs within the Bureau of Land Management, any one of them in and of themselves at the Washington D.C. level could stop something, basically. They are so coalesced at this point, and they've all had their people working on these committees that not one individual can upset the apple cart. So it's really, to me, there's a huge paradigm shift going on within the BLM and the Forest Service as a result of this. I want to talk a little bit about the bi-state effort. We developed a bi-state executive oversight committee to mirror what's going on here. So Nevada's problems is twice. I mean, we got the greater, and then we got the bi-state. And the bi-state time upon which they're going to make that decision is coming here in 2013, but we've got to have all the data to them by 12. What we found was that a lot of people in all the agencies were doing yeoman's work, but there was no buy-in at the highest level. So they were doing that on top of their normal duties. So the EOC basically has said, okay, enough of that. Your job is to do X, Y, and Z. We created a technical team. The technical team has been there. They wrote the 2004 plan, but we charged them with taking the 2004 plan, updating it if it needed to be updated in the critical areas, and then develop an action plan. And they just published the action plan, and the EOC just adopted it on the 15th of this month. And that basically lays out what we're going to do. We put a couple $100,000 into pinyon juniper removal. We're focusing on those actions that we think that address the service's concerns. We got Ted Cook sitting right with us each and every time. The neat thing about both of these processes is that we have the service sitting with us, because I told them we don't have time for bring me a rock. We don't have time. I don't want to bring you in 2012 this information saying, dang, I sure wish you had brought me this other rock. And so and they have committed to that. So all along the way, they've been course correcting to make sure that we are bringing in the right thing. And just to show you how this team can work here is that Ted laid out to me some of their ideas on how to decide, they're going to decide on the bi-state whether it should be listed or not. And I was able to ask 3 or 4 questions that he stood there had no answer for. And he said, we hadn't considered that before. So that's the power of having more people thinking, or they don't even know certain data exists. The one thing I'm very proud of the sportsman's community on this bi-state is that when I started traveling around talking with landowners and ranchers and we were talking about the birds, and I would have a livestock operator say, "Did you know there was 2 leks up on that ridge there?" And he'd look at Greg Tanner and I'd say, "Greg, would you?" Because Greg's been around forever, and he'd say, "Well, no." He said, "Well, yeah, we've known they've been there for 2 generations in my family." So it was obvious to me that we think the population of the bi-state's that big. I think it's much bigger than that. And the only way to really find that out is to put some real concerted effort into doing our LEC surveys. Now, the LEC surveys has always been the child of our deer survey. So if we had time left over, we did the LEC surveys. We did the important trend ones, but we weren't out looking around. We didn't spend helicopter time doing that. The other thing is that you can't just drive in a lot of this country at this time of year under normal circumstances because of the snow. So working with Gil, we sent out a letter, Gil did, to all of the sportsman partners and others, and asked for contributions. to do increased select surveys with a helicopter. NBU established an account within their foundation, and we've collected about $51,000 to date from gold mines, from various philanthropic foundations. We got $20,000 from the Carson Valley Chucker Club. The bi-state's not even hunted. It's unbelievable the response that we got. And we hired, or NBU hired, Craig Mortimer, which a lot of you know. He was the bi-state biologist. He knows it like the back of his hand. He worked with our staff here to develop the flight schedule, and they're currently flying as we speak. And we're going to do that through April. Cal Fish and Game ponied up, Patrick, what, 25 grand? 27,000. And that money came to us. They killed 3 biologists a couple years ago in a helicopter accident, and they have not been flying. So we had to work with their attorneys to get clearance for their biologists to be in the ship with our biologists and actually flying the White Mountains and Monitor Pass and whatnot. So that's ongoing. I'm really hopeful that I'm going to make Ted's life miserable, that we're going to hand him a data set and say, hey, bud, this population is bigger than what you thought it was, and we're doing work on pinyon juniper, and we've turned the corner on that. So let's just keep checking off the boxes, and everybody's pulling together. Another real exciting thing about the bi-state is that we have never had interest from private landowners to join the NRCS easement program. And one of the key factors in the bi-state is those private lands that offer these irrigated pastures, that when after lecking, those birds come to have their babies and raise their babies for the summer. They need to be there. If they're not there, you might as well list the bird and walk on. We have 5 major landowners already with applications in. There's $32 million worth of requests, and I made a special trip back to DC and met with the chief of NRCS and reminded him that if he wanted to move the needle on the listing of the sage-grouse, he can start with the bi-state and allocate those dollars. I also met with Senator Reed and made that same plea. He pointed across the room to his chief of staff and said, can we get that done? And she said, yes, sir, I'm almost positive. I was in a meeting with the North American this last week, and I heard that from Chief White's staff that the Senator Reed called him personally and pleaded with him to bring that money to Nevada. So I think we're doing about as well as much as we can do. And the last part of this is the governor statewide, the task force, this box over here. Corey Hunt from the governor's office will be staffing that. They're looking at bringing in a facilitator. They're going to make sure that every sector of the public is going to be represented on that task force. And the idea there is to take a look at alternatives for the BLM to evaluate in their EIS process, and basically lay out a strategy, a map for what Nevada needs to keep the bird off the list. And I think that's going to be a great help. So there's lots of moving parts, and everybody's all in, if you will. So I got a little excited. I've never been involved in something that's been so much work, but so rewarding because everybody's focused on the same thing. Even the Fish and Wildlife Service folks that in the past, I've always felt that they thought their job was to get species listed. And you don't hear that about sage-grouse. They clearly get the message. Because if the sage-grouse is listed, especially the greater, what would happen is that everything that has an effect in sage-grouse habitat, not just core, but sage-grouse habitat, will have to have a Section 7 consultation. And the service doesn't have the resources to do that. Every allotment management plan would have to be reviewed for NEPA compliance for sage-grouse, on and on and on and on. So in the short term, there's going to be things like China Mountain that the service is going to say, if you go forward with that, we'll probably have emergency listing. Those kinds of things are going to happen. But I'd rather, quite frankly, speaking personally, see us manage that and keep the bird off the list. If we go right to having the bird on the list, it'll be Armageddon, quite frankly. So.
Question.
Yeah, question, go ahead.
It's never just as simple is saying we got to have so many birds for so many years, and we're done. It's never that simple, is it?
No. No, in
I mean,
fact,
that would seem to be the logical choice. We got to have X number of birds for so many years, and it doesn't apply.
well, they have done this with the persistence model, that they've modeled how many birds they think. See, we look at leks, and if you ever looked at a lek, sometimes you see those males, you never see a female, but the females are there. So to actually get a very good count of the number of birds with a confidence interval is lacking there. So we get trend information. We do get fall stuff because we get the wings from hunters, which is critical. We can get demographic information. We have an estimate of what the population number is. So they have done this persistence modeling, and they have a number in mind. But the problem with that is all these threats that will either push it down or push it up, and it may not rain for 4 or 5 years. So you can't predict some of those things. So you're right. You wish it was as simple as saying we need that. And what scares me, if we picked a number, we might go right to listing, because we might have a 2 or 3 year drought, and maybe the survey routes weren't very robust for some reason, and we got a lower number, they could go right to listing. So, in one respect, I share your pain that it's not as simple as that. On the other hand, if it was as simple as that, that's probably not robust enough to be able to really track what's going on with great sage-grouse for the long haul.
There's a lot of opinion that the bird is much greater numbers now than it ever was in history. There's a lot of documentation to that effect. I happen to go to the same Carpenter invited me up there too, and I spoke up there, and everybody, part of my statement was, and it was short, as you can imagine, was the Department of Interior, and especially the BLM. They all say, we don't want to list the bird. Okay. I've been in charge of most my life of different businesses, and if I didn't want to do something, I didn't do it. Don't list it. Close the door.
Commissioner Drew.
Yeah, just a couple comments. When we were at WAFWA, and this kind of ties into the next part here, we were able to meet, it is Director Ash, correct, of Fish and Wildlife Service? And his statement to me was very clear. He said, we're not looking at numbers, as Commissioner Howell suggested, simply because there's really, you're comparing apples and oranges. What was here previous versus the data we have now, you can't compare because we have two totally different methods of survey. He said what's more important to the service and what's kind of required under ESA, whether we like it or not, and I know there's a lot of us that have a lot of issues with ESA overall, but that's the reality we're in. He said we look at trends, and what we're looking for is some stabilization of those trends. That's really the bottom line and what we need to see happen. We can't continue to see these declining trends. So maybe that helps answer a little bit of that. And the other thing I wanted to hit on, and Commissioner Morai, I believe, had the question of Ted Cook at our committee meeting with the public lands was, could you really define to me what a listing versus a non-listing means? And I thought Ted's answer was really good, and I think it speaks to why we want to do everything in our power to keep the bird from being listed. He said if the bird's not listed, it provides us more flexibility and room to be collaborative with all public land users. We have less exposure to litigation, which in my mind is huge. If the bird gets listed, he said our management is more prescriptive. There's a bigger regulatory hammer that comes down and hits everyone that works on public lands or enjoys public lands. Everything becomes a much longer time frame. You have a much higher litigation exposure, and you get a lot more cost of doing business on public land. So I think that gives you a sense of what the Fish and Wildlife Service is looking at in their decision, and also what it might mean for the state of Nevada, which is such a big public land state.
Commissioner Shrum.
Mr. Mayor, I have a copy here of the Western Range Service. They're based out of Elko, Nevada, and it's a summary of the findings of the Western Range Service based on our review of the BLM's Notice of Intent published in the Federal Register on December 9th, 2011. Part of it said that we discovered that the U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service own determinations show that the greater sage-grouse is not legally qualified for listing under the Endangered Species Act. And what they're going back here and saying that the Fish and Wildlife findings estimate that sage-grouse population range-wide totals approximately 535,000 birds. Okay? The total estimated current sage-grouse population of 535,000 birds is 107 times greater than a minimum effective population of 5,000 birds needed to maintain sufficient genetic material to protect the species. It would take 300 to 330 years for the estimated current sage-grouse population to dwindle. So, over here, and we talk about the BLM, frankly, my experience with the BLM, especially in southern Nevada, is that BLM is one of the major problems that we have. And if NDOW is working closely with the BLM, then frankly, we're sleeping with the enemy. The BLM is not our friend. We've got to realize that. The BLM is hurting the ranchers, hurting the farmers, and the ranchers and farmers are one of the primary reasons that we have a sage-grouse population. When you run the ranchers and the farmers out of business, we lose the sage-grouse because the sage-grouse follow the ranchers, the sheep ranchers, and the cattle ranchers. History shows that Ira Hansen has done several articles on earlier times in southern Nevada and in the Great Basin throughout the state. So I think this jumping in and spending a lot of money, this is just my own opinion, and that's probably not worth anything. But I'm just telling you that when an organization puts out a pamphlet and they're paid to do these things, and they're paid to be objective, then we should give them some thought. I know you're excited about this whole thing, but when you start telling me BLM, I see flashing signs out there because most all of us had dealings with the BLM. And for some reason, I always come out in second place. I don't understand how that happens.
Well, the reality of it is the BLM's here to stay. What they did in the past, I agree. And they may continue in the future the same way. We fight all the time with BLM, but that's been kind of put aside. We're trying to work together here. They're going to be making decisions that affect livestock operators. They're going to be making decisions that affect the habitat that for the wildlife that we have responsibility for managing. So we're going to be in there. To walk away from it be admitting defeat, and I'm not sure where we'd be if we did that. So we haven't jumped into bed with them. We're trying to be a partner and direct it the way we think it needs to happen.
Commissioner Drew?
Yeah, I guess to me it boils down to, and I've had these discussions with a lot of folks. My business deals with this on a daily basis. It comes down to two things, in my opinions, in an analogy. We've got the state of Nevada sitting on the train tracks and a big train coming at it. We can completely disengage and scream at the train to stop and stand in amazement when it doesn't, and it runs over the state of Nevada. To me, doing nothing and disengaging with the agencies does that. That doesn't mean we have to agree with them, but if we disengage and don't work with them, how are they going to incorporate what we feel is best for our state? So rather than yelling at the train, my opinion is that we should be jumping in and grabbing the state off the tracks and getting it out of the way, because the other approach simply isn't going to work, in my personal opinion.
Okay. And this doesn't just apply to sage-grouse. It applies to any situation where there's a process that is moving towards making a decision. And my feeling is that you need to be a part of the process and you need to manage the process. And if you're not there, then you're on the outside looking in. And I'd much rather be on the inside of that process and have some say. And I want to thank Director Mayer for putting up this chart and explaining where the Nevada Department of Wildlife stands with regard to the process. It's impressive. We are fully engaged, it looks like, to me, and And obviously, we should continue to push to be, as engaged as we possibly can in this issue, because, when you look at the map of all the states that have sage-grouse, it looks like just like with wild horses, we're number one, and it's a huge issue for us. And so, anyway, I'd just say keep moving on. Let's keep doing what we're doing, and I think we'll do. It's really the only way that we're going to make a difference, is being a part of the process. So I would agree with Commissioner Drew. Commissioner McNinch?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. And, Ken, this Governor Sage-Grouse Task Force, that was conservation team put in place back in 2000, that I'm not sure exactly how formed that still is, if this is just transition of that under Governor Sandoval. But the point is that there was participated in that as a representative of the commission. In our first 8 days, not talking hours, our first 8 days of that committee were spent with a high-profile, Gil, you remember, Merle, and our first 8 days were spent with a high-profile facilitator that had been part of the Bosnia peace talks, and she came at the cost of about $100,000 to determine to develop a statement that we could all live with. And there were probably 50 interests in the room, Gil. And basically what it boiled down to is that our statement had nothing to do with sage-grouse. It had to do with healthy sagebrush ecosystems. It's all we could agree to. That's where we started, and it set the foundation for where we're at now, at least in Nevada. And I think the point that I'm trying to make here is that it's been a very long-term process. I think that some of the things that have occurred over the last several years, largely provided the framework or provided the foundation to get to where we're going, where we're changing how we interact with BLM, and now that's getting pushed over the top to the point where the whole goal here is to put together a conservation plan, and it just doesn't apply to just sage-grouse. It would apply to any other sagebrush obligate, sage sparrows, brewer sparrows, pygmy rabbits, and you can take it clear on out to every species that exists in Nevada. Isn't it ideal to develop a conservation plan without the weight of the ESA, as if you had the ESA forcing you to do it? I mean, isn't that what it's all about? Developing plans and conservation plans for conservation of wildlife without having to have them listed to force that. And the challenges are, one by one, are being attacked and taken down. That regulatory scheme, that was identified as part of the National BLM Framework Team. They met in Boise, Salt Lake, and Phoenix. I was part of each of those meetings. The number one, out of those meetings, 5 things came up, and the one that kept coming to the top was the lack of a regulatory framework to make things happen. And we're still obviously there, but the point is that it's a higher profile, it's being addressed, and aren't we glad we started when we did? And I think ultimately we're seeing private landowners take advantage of the NRCS opportunities, to say, we'll pay you $300,000 to leave to use your property just as you are for the next 20 years, okay? Meaning nothing's changing for them. There's safe harbor type of stuff going on out there. Those things are huge. Paying people to do what they do because it's good, and that doesn't help working. That doesn't work working in a vacuum. We have to be at the table. We have to work with these folks. Landscape scale species impacts every habitat we've got in Nevada, bar very few. Alpine and subalpine might be exempt from it, but outside of that, pretty much everything's impacted, and there's certainly every interest that's impacted. So I appreciate the efforts, and I will give a plug to Sean Espinoza. The guy's been involved for an awfully long time, and he does an unbelievable job. He just keeps it on track, and there's a tremendous amount of energy. It's just part of his job. He's got a million other things to do, but he does a great job. So thanks.
I do want to just follow up, and the regulatory framework issue is basically the movement towards the resource management plans. But in advance of that, we do have this interim memo that laid out some of the basic regulatory framework that deals with the issues that are out there right now. And obviously, I believe that had a large part of the White Rock wind project down there in Lincoln County that was such a big deal for us for a long time that they've packed their bags and or so to speak, it looks like they've withdrawn their project, and I imagine that had a little bit to do with it. So anyway, any other comments on this agenda item? Okay.
Our maps are available on our website. So the biological base is there that you can look at. Category 1, Category 2 are what would the rest of people call core, and Category 3 is Category 4 is general habitat. And I think the BLM used 1 and 2 for their primary, preliminary primary. I call it preliminary because they're not done with it. But their primary sage-grouse habitat and our Category 3 they converted into their general, and they didn't even consider our 4. And there's only a little bit of 4 that really has anything.
Commissioner Wallace?
Are there any maps that are a little more detailed? There was one yesterday in that presentation, and it showed some areas in my county that I'd be curious to look at on a more detailed basis as it's just a blotch of color on the map. Is there anything that's more detailed that would show some landmarks?
We can produce that in various scales because it's in the GIS. Come by my office. I've got a copy of that size and see if that does.
Okay.
If not, we can, focus in on the. And the way those maps were made was we started with the 75% breeding core map, the Daughtery map. We put our, and that's basically a modeling exercise, what sage-grouse like versus in the habitat. We took our telemetry data, our trend information, we took all the biological data we had, overlaid it, so now we created a better map, and then we pulled in every biologist in the state, and they sat for 2 days in one of the rooms with the GIS guy and Sean, and making sure that those maps reflected where we knew birds existed. So I think it's the best out there, frankly.
Commissioner Rain?
All the studies and all the discussion in the world are all fine and great as long as they end in dramatic and drastic action that occurs on the ground. If this is what's going on here, that this is leading to some dramatic action that will take place on the ground, great. I hope there's a timeline for that. Hope it's very, very soon. Thank you.
About the studies and stuff, the department and you have taken some hits on the studies and the amount of time and money that's spent on studies. The only thing keeping us in the game is the studies.
Right.
If we didn't have the stuff, I appreciate the studies. I know it's a lot of time and a lot of money, and it might not do anything, but I think that's the only thing keeping us in the game.
And finally, the people who are going to make the decision are the service. NDOW is not in a decision-making mode. And so in looking at what role we can play, I told somebody the other day, I'm a little bit like the little yap dog. And once the feds, I found out the other day that not all the national forests have been included in the whole EIS process. And I found that out through the EOC, and I've started things with the Chief of the Forest Service to make sure that they are on board, because that could be the Achilles heel for Western watersheds. And so all we can do is just keep pushing them in the right direction, and then do the best product we can, and hopefully they'll find not warranted.
Okay.
Oh. We don't have public comment.
Informational, yeah. Can we have one of our committee members on public lands come up and speak? Would that be a problem? He's on our public. Yeah. Mike, come on up. Mike is one of the members on the Public Lands Committee, former state engineer, former director of the Department of Conservation and Natural Resources for the state of Nevada, and so on.
Mike Turnipseed for the record.
Yep.
And I realize you don't usually take public comment on informational items, but Ken just made the statement that ultimately the Fish and Wildlife Service is going to make the final decision. with one exception. That's going to be the judge with the funny name up in Idaho Falls.
Windmill.
I hate to make fun of people's last names for obvious reasons, but the assuming the record of decision is going to be favorable, that the bird doesn't warrant listing, and we all hope that that happens, then does the judge, is that all he sees, or does he see the whole ball of wax, all of the data, how they massaged it, how they analyzed it, how they chewed it up and spit it out, or does he just see the record of decision?
Great question. We're painstakingly putting the administrative record together with all the studies, with all the surveys, with all the meetings. All that information goes to the judge, because if Western Watershed sues in Windmills Court, they'll say that we didn't do an adequate job. The service then provides the administrative record with all that stuff in there. He has to rule from that.
And so it's up to this U.S. Attorney for Fish and Wildlife Service to do a good job.
Correct.
Getting all of that stuff clearly, what I want to say, readable, recognizable, and understandable for the judge.
Correct.
Thanks.
And in the past, I was told they sent the B team. The director of the service clearly understands they need to send the A team.
Yeah, good.
Okay. What's the status of our lunch?
They're supposed, I'm just going out to meet them. They're supposed to be here at 12.
Okay, then I'm gonna, how long do you think your WAFA comments are gonna be?
Jeremy's going to make more comments tonight. He takes better notes than I do.
Okay. Well, why don't we do, let's do agenda item 16B, and then